My wife thought I wouldn't find out she'd sneaked off to her boss's house until I followed her and saw the shocking scene. The two of them on the balcony, laughing as if nothing else existed. I felt the ground disappear beneath me, but I didn't make a scene. I went back home, left a short note, and left. Don't wait for me. After that, she tried to justify herself, but it was too late. She discovered shortly after that her boss only wanted a fleeting fling. He discarded her without ceremony. Alone, she wallowed in the regret she pretended not to feel. I moved on. Over time, I met a new love, with a calm gaze and simple truth. When she came to me with tears and apologies, I listened in silence and simply said, "I forgive you, but I'm not coming back." And so, each of us went our separate ways. She with the emptiness she caused, I with the peace I regained. It wasn't just any betrayal. It wasn't one of those stories you hear and say, "Oh, it happens." It was a subtle, silent stab, planned in small gestures and long omissions. It was a glance that looked away unnecessarily, a message answered too late, a perfume that was never the same on the way home. I felt it. Deep down, we always feel it. But nobody wants to believe they're being deceived by the person who promised eternal love. Nobody wants to admit that the love you gave wholeheartedly was coldly rejected by someone who simply chose to play with it. I wasn't perfect, but I was loyal, present, dedicated. I woke up every day thinking about how to make her feel loved, and her. She went out with a stranger, her boss, as if everything we built meant nothing. And the worst part is that she smiled. When I saw them together on that balcony, they weren't two guilty people hiding. They were two carefree accomplices. As if I didn't exist, as if my love had been just an obstacle overcome, and that hurt. It hurt like nothing before. I went home speechless. The pain choked me. I went inside, sat on the sofa, and for 10 long minutes stared at the picture from our 3rd wedding anniversary. In that photo, she was hugging me tightly, as if she would never let go. I smiled that day, and today, looking at that image, it all seemed like a cruel joke. I wrote just one sentence, a single line. "Don't wait for me." I left without making a sound, without saying where I was going, without giving her the right to interrupt me. She called, texted, tried to explain, said it wasn't what I thought, that she needed to talk, that there was context. But sometimes the absence of character comes disguised as context. Betrayal isn't just physical, it's mental, emotional, spiritual. She betrayed everything we were, everything we could still be. Time passed. I hid from the world. I stayed away from social media, from our usual places. I was ashamed, not only of her, but of myself. How could I, who gave everything, have been so blind? How could I not have seen the signs, the hidden messages, the extended hours at work, the sudden lack of interest in our conversations, in our plans? I blamed myself. I questioned myself. But then I understood that the mistake wasn't mine. It was in the selfish decision of someone who had everything and wanted more. Someone who, even loved, chose to take a risk, and lost. Years later, she tried to come back. With swollen eyes, a trembling voice, simple clothes, her face bearing the marks of someone who had lived badly. She sought me out, saying she had made a mistake, that she had been foolish, that she missed me. She said the other man had discarded her, that he had never loved her, that it had all been a game, that now she saw, that now she understood, and that she only wanted one chance, just one. But I was no longer that man. It no longer hurt. It no longer burned. I listened to everything with serenity, because, between the silence of my pain and the chaos of her choice, I had learned to rebuild myself, and there was someone by my side now, someone who looked at me with truth, who didn't need grand words to love me. Just being there was enough. I didn't need to shout. I just said, "I forgive you, but I'm not coming back." And that destroyed her more than any shouting. But there's something she never knew. Something only I carry. Deep down, she lost me long before I left. Because the week before the betrayal, I was preparing a surprise. A weekend in a country house, just the two of us, including a candlelit dinner and a simple gift, a handwritten letter, where I said that, even with all the problems, I still believed in us, that I wanted to renew our vows, that I still saw a future. I kept that letter, and I never gave it to her. In fact, I threw it away the same day I saw her smiling on the porch with someone else. That was my grief. She never knew about the trip I canceled, the restaurant I paid for months in advance, the simple ring I ordered just to see her smile. She never knew that until the very last second I still chose her, even with the doubts, even with the signs. I still believed, and she chose not to love me at that moment. Now she says she misses me, that she can't find anyone like me, that I was her home. But whoever destroys a home willingly rarely finds peace again. She blames herself. She regrets it. She writes me long letters, and I read them. I read them all, but I don't answer. Because it's no longer about pride. It's protection. I protect myself from the pain I already know, from the emptiness she left behind. Today, when I walk down the street hand in hand with another woman, and I see a gaze watching me from afar, I know it's her, seeing me from afar, feeling what I felt on that balcony, seeing me smile without her, as if nothing else existed. The cruelest part of betrayal isn't the act itself, it's what it destroys inside. It's the trust that evaporates. It's the ground that disappears beneath your feet. It's the certainty that turns to doubt. It's looking into the eyes of someone you love and no longer recognizing anyone there. It's not knowing when was the last time she lied, or when was the last time she told the truth. It's discovering that while you were making plans for us, she was already living someone else. It's understanding that you were the only one fighting for something that was already dead on the other side. But fate has curious ways of putting the pieces in place. Because time passed, and today she knows she truly lost me. Not because I wanted to leave, but because she didn't know how to stay. And now, she carries a pain she can't share with anyone, a regret that weighs heavier with each passing day. Because no matter how hard she tries to move on, she always returns to that moment. The balcony, the laughter, the letter, and everything she threw away. But what she doesn't yet know is that there's one last thing, something I've never told anyone, something that could change everything, something that was the real reason I never looked back again. And that's what this story will reveal. Welcome to the channel where love is taken seriously and betrayal is never romanticized. Here, no form of infidelity is supported. On the contrary, our stories are fictionalized to show how betrayal destroys homes, corrodes feelings, and leaves deep scars. Each narrative is a reflection of human choices and their consequences. Prepare yourself for an intense, realistic, and deeply moving story. Take a deep breath. What you are about to hear will leave you speechless. They seemed perfect for each other from their first meeting. It wasn't love at first sight, not in the cliché and instantaneous sense of the word, but there was a silent connection, a mutual understanding that needed no explanation. Her name was Emma and his, Daniel. Two common names, two common stories, which, when they crossed paths, gave rise to something that, for a long time, was anything but common. Emma was organized, meticulous, vain in a balanced way, and quick to laugh, but only when she felt secure. She had a serene beauty, the kind that doesn't scream for attention, but occupies space with presence. Daniel, on the other hand, had a more reserved manner, a gaze that seemed to observe the world calmly before acting, someone who said little, but when he spoke, he delivered more than it seemed. They were in their early 20s when they met, and there were no major upheavals in either of their lives. They had stable jobs, supportive families, and a similar desire to build something real, something solid, far from empty adventures and broken promises. Their first conversation took place in a cafe. Neither of them was looking for anyone, and perhaps that's why the connection felt so natural. They talked for hours about books, old movies, dream trips, silent traumas, and small daily vices. They laughed at the same things, disagreed on others, but with respect and lightness, and that was enough. In the following days, Emma began responding to Daniel's messages more quickly, and Daniel, who had always been reluctant about social media, found himself anxious to see if she had written anything yet. It was all simple, unhurried, as if they both knew that the right feeling doesn't need to be rushed to blossom. Over time, gestures followed. Flowers left on the doorstep, notes hidden between the pages of a book, lingering hugs after a difficult day, Sunday family lunches, weekends spent swapping TV series for comfortable silence. They weren't an explosive couple. They didn't fit the stereotype of intense romances full of comings and goings. But there was constancy, and there was presence. Emma felt safe by his side. She felt seen. Daniel, in turn, found in Emma a peace he had never known before. He felt he could be himself, without needing to feign enthusiasm or hide his vulnerabilities. That's how they decided to live together, 2 years after their first coffee. A decision made without haste, on a rainy Saturday, when the two of them, huddled on the sofa, concluded that it no longer made sense to sleep apart. The apartment they rented was small but airy. It had a narrow balcony where Emma grew herbs and ornamental plants, and where Daniel had coffee on Saturday mornings, listening to jazz at a low volume. The bedroom was simple, with a light blue wall that Emma herself had painted, which ended up slightly crooked, but became charming. Their days had a routine: shared breakfast, work at different times, meeting up in the evening for light dinners and conversations about the day. On Fridays, they ordered takeout and watched old movies. On Sundays, they went for long walks. There were no grand promises, but there was a daily choice, and that was enough. As time went by, challenges also arose, differences in small things. Emma liked to plan everything in advance. Daniel preferred to let things happen. She was bothered by his disorganization. He missed her spontaneity. They argued, of course, but never loudly. They had respect even in disagreements, and an honest desire to resolve them. They grew together. They learned to compromise, to apologize, to admit when they were wrong. Emma changed jobs after 4 years at the same company. The new job demanded more, took up more hours of her day, but she was excited. Daniel supported her from the beginning, even when it meant seeing her arrive late, tired, or with her mind still on office problems. He understood. He knew that growth also required sacrifices, and he didn't complain about giving up space. Dinners became quieter, not for lack of love, but for exhaustion. Daniel tried to keep the flame alive with small gestures, writing supportive messages that he left stuck on the refrigerator, preparing her favorite dish on nights when she couldn't cook, listening even when she just wanted to complain about her boss or the exhausting routine. Emma thanked him, sometimes with a long kiss, other times with a tight hug in the darkness of the room before bed. She felt pressured in her new position. She was expected to be productive, present, and assertive. It was a more competitive environment, where smiling too much was seen as weakness, and showing tiredness was admitting defeat. She began to change. She became more withdrawn, more reserved, more objective. Daniel noticed but believed it was just a phase. There was still affection. It was visible. Emma would lean against his chest in the early hours of the morning when she woke up anxious, and Daniel would comfort her without question. There was love there, love in the touch, in the silence, in the way they respected each other's time. But there was also distance, an invisible distance, inexplicable but felt. The body was present, but the soul, at times, seemed to be elsewhere. Daniel tried to start conversations, to ask about her day, but Emma would answer with short sentences. She said she was tired, and he understood. After all, it was true. They had planned a trip, but it was postponed due to Emma's busy schedule. Daniel said it was fine, that they could reschedule. But deep down, he felt a pang. Not because of the trip itself, but because he was the one who always made the plans now. Before, she was the one who surprised him. Now, she seemed to just accept it. The small gestures diminished. The flowers became rarer. The notes disappeared. There were still the Friday dinners, but often with Emma's eyes glued to her cell phone, answering emails, even at 10 o'clock at night. Daniel, silent, looked at her and wondered where exactly she was. Not in physical space, but inside. Where had that woman from the first coffees, the silly laughs, and the spontaneous hugs gone? Emma seemed conflicted. There were moments when she would return, preparing a surprise dinner, watching an entire movie without touching her phone, hugging him tightly and saying, "Thank you for being here." Daniel felt a glimmer of hope in those moments, but they passed quickly. The next day, everything returned to silence, to the cold touch, to the ever-present absence. The routine remained stable. But behind the automatic gestures, there was an increasingly alert Daniel. Every detail seemed laden with meaning. A new outfit, a different perfume, an excuse to stay out longer. He said nothing. He observed. He waited. He tried to understand. He wanted to believe that he was just exaggerating, seeing things where there were none, but something inside him whispered that it wasn't quite like that. Months passed and Daniel began to write. Not out of old habit, but out of necessity. He wrote about his feelings, his suspicions, his memories. It was his way of not silently going insane. He wrote about their first kiss, their first fight, the first night they slept together. He wrote about his doubts, about the questions he didn't ask, about the painful silences. He kept everything in a notebook hidden in the bottom drawer of his desk. It wasn't a diary, it was a testament, a map of what was being lost each day without anyone shouting. He still loved her, but I was beginning to understand that perhaps, just perhaps, this love was no longer enough for two. One afternoon, after a long walk, Daniel stopped in front of a jewelry store window. His eyes lingered for a few minutes on a simple, elegant silver ring with discreet details. He thought about buying it. He thought about wearing it as a symbolic gesture, an attempt to reclaim what he felt was slipping away. But something inside him hesitated. It wasn't the fear of rejection. It was the doubt about whether it was still the right time, if there was still room for it. He went home without the ring. They dined in silence that night. Emma mentioned an important presentation at work, and Daniel pretended to be interested. His eyes, however, seemed absent, and for the first time she noticed. She asked if he was all right. He said yes, but she knew he wasn't. And in that instant, something changed. As if the layers of a painting began to peel away, revealing a background they both avoided looking at. The relationship was still there. There was still love. But he was tired, and she was torn. They both knew, even without saying it, that something was drifting away. But neither had the courage to face what was really happening. Not yet. It was still too early. There was still time. Or, at least, that's what they both wanted to believe. Daniel never liked the feeling of spying, but that late afternoon, something guided him with a certainty he couldn't explain. Emma's frequent absence was no longer just an impression. It was an empty presence that filled the house. The kisses given out of habit, the messages answered late, the touches that seemed distracted, and the eyes always elsewhere. In recent days, something had been gnawing at him from the inside with an intensity he tried to ignore, but which, with each subtle gesture, became harder to deny. So he did what you never imagined he would do. He got in the car, waited for the usual excuse, and without saying a word, followed her. There was no anger, no plans, no emotional weapons at hand, just the brutal need to face the truth, whatever it might be. The street was tree-lined, a little secluded, discreet. He recognized the house even before seeing her car parked there. He'd been there once before, at a company party Emma had insisted he attend. The host was her boss. Everything very elegant, very cold, everything with that false shine that Daniel always avoided. Now, standing on the other side of the street, with the engine off, he observed through the short, cruel distance, and what he saw pierced his chest like a slow blade. On the porch of the house, under the golden light of the late afternoon, Emma smiled. A wide, light smile, the same one that had once been only his. Beside her, the boss. He was saying something, and she laughed as she hadn't laughed with Daniel in a long time. It was the kind of laugh that came from the stomach, that escaped effortlessly, as if there were no weight there at all. They were too close, too intimate, too comfortable. She ran her hand along his arm, and he rested his forehead against hers for a brief second. And in that second, everything dissolved. Daniel didn't feel anger, not at that moment. He felt a kind of paralysis, as if his body wouldn't react, as if his heart had stopped beating to avoid exploding. Shame, disgust, disappointment. They all came later, one after the other, invading every part of him with a silent violence. He returned to the car with trembling hands. He drove home on autopilot. He didn't cry. He didn't scream. He just went inside, sat on the sofa where she had lain so many times, and took a deep breath. He took a piece of paper, wrote in firm, dry handwriting, "Don't wait for me." He folded it, left it on the kitchen table, and left. Without a destination, without explanation, without warning, the time of pain had begun. Emma returned late that night. She opened the door and called for him without much enthusiasm, perhaps expecting to find him asleep or busy. When she saw the letter, her eyes froze for long seconds. She read it, reread it, and then, perhaps for the first time in a long time, her body reacted. She sat up, picked up the phone, called, ringed, and went to voicemail. She sent messages, 1, 2, 10, no reply. She tried to justify herself, said it wasn't as it seemed, asked to talk, to explain. But Daniel's silence was more eloquent than any shout. In the following days, Emma didn't show up for work. She turned off her cell phone for a few hours, then left it on, hoping he would contact her. He didn't. He moved to another place, temporarily. A small rented room with only the essentials. Daniel was now a shadow of the man he once was. He had lost weight. His gaze was empty, but there was an unwavering resolve in his silence. He didn't want to hear justifications. He didn't want to know why. What he saw was enough, and nothing she said would change that. But Emma insisted. After weeks, she managed to convince him to agree to a conversation. They arranged to meet at a neutral cafe where they had spent so many happy afternoons. She arrived first. She was thinner, more worn out, with deep dark circles under her eyes and the same perfume as always, which now made her nauseous. When he arrived, her eyes filled with tears, but he remained composed. He sat down, crossed his arms, and waited. She began by saying that she didn't know where to start, that things had gotten out of control, that she felt lost at work, pressured, lonely, needy, that her boss had offered attention, a listening ear, affection, that she had become involved without realizing it, but that it meant nothing, that it was just an escape, that Daniel was the love of her life. He listened to everything. He didn't interrupt. He observed. Every word seemed to come from a script. There was emotion, but also an attempt to save what could no longer be saved. When she finished, he took a deep breath and said in a firm voice, "I loved you. Until the very last second. Even when you no longer chose me, I still chose you. And you laughed with him, as if nothing existed. You did that knowing who I was, knowing what we had. And that cannot be undone with apologies." Emma tried to hold his hand. He gently pushed it away. His eyes were moist but firm. He said he forgave her, that he didn't wish her ill, that he understood that humans make mistakes, but that he wouldn't go back, that he couldn't, that something inside him had died on that balcony, and that he needed to respect that. She cried. She begged for another chance. She spoke of the future, of rebuilding. But Daniel was no longer there. And then, days later, what she never knew came to light. Emma found unintentionally an envelope among the books in his room that he hadn't taken. It was a simple folder, marked with the month before the breakup. Inside, 3 printed reservations: a charming house in the countryside for a weekend, a romantic dinner booked at her favorite restaurant, and a receipt for a silver ring. There was also a handwritten letter, a draft perhaps. It began by saying, "I know things haven't been easy, but I still believe in us." And it continued with memories, promises, plans to renew their vows of love. The last sentence read, "Even in silence, I keep choosing you." She collapsed. The tears were no longer just of guilt. They were tears of loss. Real, irreversible loss. She realized, with the brutality of a punch, that Daniel hadn't left because he stopped loving her. He left at the height of their love, just when he was preparing a gesture of reconciliation. She, meanwhile, smiled on the balcony with another man. That discovery devastated her in a way that no other words could translate. It was too late. She had destroyed the love of a man who still chose her even amidst his doubts. Regret now had form, smell, memory, and paper. And none of the words spoken in that cafe could recover what had been thrown away. Daniel moved on. He changed houses. He saw friends again. Little by little he rediscovered laughter, not in the same way, but with sincerity. And then, one day, he met someone new. Someone who wasn't better, or prettier, or more interesting, but someone who was whole, who didn't measure her presence, who said what she felt without fear. And with time, Daniel discovered that it was possible to start over without forgetting, without erasing. Just moving on, with scars that no longer hurt, only remind us. Emma, on the other hand, learned to live with the emptiness. She tried other relationships. None lasted. She tried to occupy her mind with work, but she always returned to that undelivered letter, that canceled trip, the ring she never got to wear. She returned to the exact moment she smiled with another man, while the only one who truly loved her silently prepared a surprise to win her back. And that was the real punishment, knowing that, by betraying him, she didn't just destroy a relationship, she destroyed the purest love he had ever received, and he moved on. Not out of revenge, but because he deserved it. Because some hearts, when broken, don't heal to return to the same place. They heal to learn to love again. At another time, with another person, in another way. Emma spent months trying to pretend life was going on. She invented routines, filled her time, smiled mechanically at meetings, told her friends she was fine, even though every word sounded empty to herself. After that conversation at the cafe and the discovery of the canceled reservations, the pain became permanent. She slept little, and when she did, she dreamed of Daniel, not of the end, but of everything they had before the end. The smell of his t-shirt on Sunday mornings, the silent touches in the middle of the night when she had anxiety attacks, the way he looked at her when she laughed at her own lame jokes. None of that would come back. And no matter how much she tried to convince herself that she deserved to start over, there was a part of Emma that knew she hadn't just lost a love. She had lost the last space where dignity still existed in the eyes of someone who truly knew her. People around her noticed. The sparkle had faded. She seemed less interested, more reserved, less available. At lunches with colleagues, she avoided talking about her personal life. In messages, the replies were short, as if any depth touched on something she could no longer face. She tried to get closer to other people, went out with 2 or 3 men she met at the insistence of friends, but none of them made her feel anything but discomfort. Not because they were bad, simply because none of those looks pierced her like Daniel's. Everyone saw her as a beautiful, intelligent, interesting woman, but no one saw her as he did, with depth, with truth, with the intention of staying even on the bad days. And the cruelest thing was knowing that, if she had waited a little longer, perhaps he would have proposed. Perhaps he would have given her the ring, the letter, the weekend. But she didn't wait. And the love that could have saved her turned into a mirror, and every day, upon waking, she saw herself in it, alone. On the other hand, Daniel didn't immediately start over. The grieving process was long, necessary, and dark. There were days of absolute silence, nights of profound questioning, and mornings when the simple act of opening his eyes seemed too heavy. But he didn't run from the process. He allowed himself to feel each phase of the pain. He accepted the emptiness as part of the healing. It took him months to accept invitations, reconnect with friends, truly laugh, and look at someone with lightness. When he met Rachel, he didn't yet know what he was ready to experience. She was different from Emma in every way, not just in her manner, but in her energy. She had a truth in her gaze that disarmed him effortlessly, a calmness that made him breathe easier, as if the world stopped demanding strength all the time. Rachel didn't pressure him to forget the past. She didn't demand promises. She simply stayed. Present, constant, simple. They started slowly. A coffee here, a walk there. And over time, Daniel realized that there was still room within him to love. In a different way, with different colors, but still with truth. Trust gradually emerged. Like someone building a bridge over a river where there had previously been a shipwreck, and Rachel knew how to respect each step. She never wanted to compete with ghosts, never wanted to replace them. She understood that love doesn't fade, it only transforms. And that's how Daniel found himself again. For the first time in a long time, I felt I could smile without remorse, without hidden pain, that I could, finally, breathe again. Years later, Emma ran into Daniel by chance. He was in a park, laughing with Rachel and a 5-year-old girl who called him Daddy. Rachel's daughter, from a previous relationship, had become a natural part of Daniel's life. He didn't force the role, but fulfilled it with love. And there, in that simple scene, Emma saw everything she had lost. It wasn't his smile that hurt the most. It was the way he held the girl's hand with such care, with such devotion, as if he had finally found a new reason to stay. She watched from afar. She didn't approach. She wasn't noticed. And in that instant she understood that no apology, no desperate gesture, could restore what she herself had destroyed. Daniel had moved on. And she, however much she pretended, was still standing in the same place where he had left her. At work, Emma continued to be respected, but she was never admired as before. She sabotaged herself. She began to refuse opportunities that required travel, stopped investing in new projects. She felt that everything she achieved didn't compensate for what she lost, and little by little, she withdrew. She lived with dignity, calmly, but without passion. The regret was no longer anger at herself. It was awareness. She knew she had thrown away something rare, and that people like Daniel don't come along twice in life, and perhaps the cruelest thing was knowing that he would have stayed if she had chosen to wait. Daniel and Rachel decided to live together 2 years after meeting. They didn't have a party, they didn't post photos. But that night, sitting on the sofa, amidst laughter and stories about her daughter, Daniel looked at Rachel with the same calm with which he had once looked at Emma. But this time, there was something different. There was no doubt. There was no fear. There was peace. That kind of peace that only those who have been betrayed by life can recognize. And he knew then that he didn't need to search anymore. Because despite everything, he still believed in love. But now, he believed in a love that doesn't apologize too late. If you've made it this far, tell us in the comments what you thought of this story. Which character touched you the most? Do you believe forgiveness is possible after betrayal? And more than that, do you think it's possible to love someone again who destroyed what you had? Subscribe to the channel to continue receiving real human stories that deeply touch the soul. Here, no betrayal is romanticized. All stories are fictional, but the feelings they evoke are profoundly real. This story shows us how betrayal doesn't just destroy a relationship, it destroys respect, memory, peace, and often, the chance for a future that was about to happen. No matter how much someone regrets it, time doesn't go back. And there are pains that teach us that true love should only be given to those who choose to stay. That every choice has a price. And sometimes, the price is living forever with the regret of having lost someone who truly loved us. Remember, this channel does not support any form of betrayal. Here, truth, loyalty, and conscious love will always be the protagonists. Get ready for more impactful stories. Until next time.